The Twin Summer. In the summer age of the summer season of the final god day, which the many gods had many names for, which included Doppelsommer and Hochsommer and Großsommer, the twin suns reached their zenith above the world of doom. For the next 3,000 years, the twin suns never set below the horizons of land or sea, and the world was perpetually lit by the pious lights of Valavana. Everywhere in the world, the lands were lush and green and bursting forth beyond abundance. The creeping and crawling and buzzing things thrived and boomed in the tall grasses and fireweeds beyond count. So great their numbers became that gray clouds formed and swarmed above every land and fresh body of water, and of these were the tiny and distant chaotic kin of vamplings, called Flussblüterbeißeringen, or little flying bloodbiters. These vamplings were so abundant in the verdant world that the animals filled their bellies with them daily, and swatted them constantly, but still they swarmed beyond reckoning, so that most of the bloodbiters either starved or were forced to crush themselves in desperate ambition. They piled upon the earths and waters, and fertilized the lakes and rivers, and laid eggs where water was complacent. Wherefore fishes grew a taste for buzzing things, in addition to worms, whence all good baits rise. So and so, the countless beings and things of doom experienced gargantuan growth, and blessed bounties, and holy harmonies, and peace aplenty during all this time. The good-natured and noble-willed animals thrived under the many tribes of elfin gods throughout their domains, while the ill-willed beings of doom lived in the many shadows of the elfin gods, for nothing chaotic was spared from hiding. So it was that many noble-willed beings came to be in great number, and all of them were aided by the elfin gods of every domain. Therefore, in each domain of Mother Nature, the eldest beings came to be the kings of the kingdoms of beings and things, and the Animalin were the most favored of the 7 kingdoms. Then, in each kingdom of things, there came to be many principalities, called phylums, or races, whose beings were the eldest prince of the kings. In each principality, there were many common classes of life, whose beings were the children of the princes of kings. Then, within each common class, were the many orders of nature, whose beings were the golden boughs of the tree of life, called Yggdrasil. From these ordered boughs, the families of beings and things came to be, like sticks on a branch of a single tree. Then the twigs of the sticks became the kindlings called kinds, whose beings were the tribes of the tree of life. So and so, each member of each tribe was a leaf of its own that formed the canopy. In this way, all living things were the veins on the leaves of the twigs of the sticks, of the branches of the ashen boughs, of the topmost tree of life, called Yggdrasil, in the divine god grove. The royal frost gods, known as Flower Elfin, called the summer age of the summer season the Doppelsommer, or double summer, because the twin suns lingered and loitered immutably in the southern skies. Valavana graced every root and pedicel and ovary and ovule and pistil and stamen and petal and pollen in the world. The flower elfin were most attuned to the prophecies of nature and the divine, and they were gripped by every line and stanza of poetic prophecy. Wherefore they expected the wombing of the world in the great summertime. Thus they set about to prepare the Southlands for the wombed beings who would evolve in the upright and noble image of the Azir gods. Hence, to and fro, and thrum and throw, the flower elfin carved and cured and cared and curved the vast southlands below the frost-capped ranges. The elves were infinitely familiar with the natural splendors and beings in the lands and waters and nooks and crannies of their domain, and by this they knew how best to build and craft the places and spaces for life and life's lovers. Yet they knew not what kind or form of wombed being would emerge in the image of the Azir royals in the world of doom. Already there was a great diversity of life, and many kinds gave birth in good and noble ways. And though many kinds of primordiatin were nearest the image of the Azir, by the standards of time and the spirit of change, their dreams to find the offsprings of Immerspring remained distant and drab and dour at best. At worst, their seeds of Immerspring were doomed. So it was in the eastern range of the frost-capped mountains, along the southern face in the steep foothills, the flower elfin prepared the southlands for the prophetic beings of noble womb and free will. In the feet of the mountains, they found a high and wide and steep hill that was perfect for their visions of crafting. The hill was flanked by two large tributaries that formed the confluence of the river Sommersmolde just southwards. This hill was flanked and protected by the mountain range behind it, and before it lay the winding river and vast and endless farmlands and meadows of enduring fertility and fecundity. Thus, the flower elfin carved the high hill into a perfect cylinder of solid rock, whose plateau was as flat as a river stone, and whose sides were vertical and ribbed. They called this perfect piece of rock the Spear of Elementa, for it was carved through the arts of the ancient elementals, who bore the minds of the holy spirits, and who colored the trees of life with contrasting marvels and complementary magics. Then the flower elfin carved into the cylinder at its southern base a single main entrance to an elaborate labyrinth of wide and tall tunnels that climbed and circumvented the spire with countless rooms and chambers and halls therein and there around and thereunder. At the top of the great plateau, in the center of the wide cylinder of rock, a great well was bored to the base of doom 5,000 flower lengths below, and then they drilled with their wands another 20,000 flower lengths deeper into the crust of the world, until it made no more sense to dig. Halfway between the plateau and the base, a great many canals were carved that radiated from the great well to the cliff faces of the spire of elements, although there was not yet water. At last, a great many conduits and ducts and channels and creases were carved throughout the spire so exquisitely and precisely to allow trickles or droplets or steams, and so the spire of elements became seamed and veined like a leaf within. Finally, the flower elfin crafted from their divine might, and from every color of every petal of nature, a perfectly round stone seed, called Grossgrünsteinset, or great green stone seed. Then, standing in song and prayer around the rim of the great well, atop the plateau of the great spire, the royal gods dropped the stone seed into the well of Leaf, where it fell a great distance to the bottom. There it grew roots that cracked the toughest and hottest rock, and bore yet deeper as a single anchor, farther and farther into the world of doom, until at last it broke through the crust and sank yet deeper through the mantle to the lowest reaches called the dark depths. There, at the bottom of doom, it broke through the roots of Yggdrasil to Muspelheimer beneath. Thus the intense heat of Muspelheimer rose from the deeps of the roots of the great green stone seed, This heat combined with the underground rivers of holy waters that dwelled in the bottom soils of the summerlands, where the well of Leaf was sprung with the streams of life. Hence, while the elfin gods called it the Well of Leaf, the Azir gods called it Unabruder, or Well of Fate, because its holy waters were expected to nourish the welling womb of the Immerspring. Ever after, the heat of Muspelheimer mixed with the ground waters of the Summerlands to become storming clouds of searing vapor far below. These blessed clouds then cooled as they climbed the Well of Leaf, until they became scalding steams of life. Eventually, the foaming fount of firewater reached the spire of elements above ground, and these piping hot fogs then fumed and plumed the many valves and conduits and veins and seams that had been carved throughout the spire. In these channels, the holy waters condensed and cooled to boiling, which provided porous plumbing and hot waterspouts and nourishing mists and drips in every room and tunnel. A great ring of boiling waterfalls surged and ranged from the ridged faces of the spire and drained into the two tributary rivers nearby. The vapors that billowed past and beyond the conduits and valves then reached the mouth of the Well of Leaf at the top of the plateau and spewed plumes of sacred steams into the skies above, like rising rain, whence all good waters rise. Throughout the age called Doppelzommer, the flower elfin began and completed many other projects to perfection, and everywhere the land and waters were made hospitable and splendid. The Well of Leaf enriched the tributaries that fed the river Sommersmother, which endowed the countless lands and nooks and crannies in the Summerlands with endless blooming. The meadows and flower fields and animals drank their fill of holy waters until drunken with delights, and thus they became ever more full of musics and magics and wishes and wellness and wonders and wisdoms, all woven and watered by the wellspring of Leaf called Fate. Elsewhere, the many sub-tribes of elfin gods in each domain were busy preparing and carving and crafting and shaping and enchanting and charming and blessing and sowing the seeds of Immerspring wherever the land was driest or in need. And in the seven seas, and throughout the many fresh waters and wells and springs and rivers and lakes of the world, the elfin gods tended and tempered and tinted the world with magic and song and dance. In the summer solstice of the midsummer season, of the midsummer age, of the midsummer season, of the final god day, the world of doom and its many beings reached a climax of color.